You think you know someone, but sometimes you don't even know them at all. Jessica's hands trembled as she held her phone, staring at the screen in disbelief. Richard, her husband of 10 years, had sent a brief, apologetic message. "I'm sorry, I won't be able to make it tonight. Work's taking longer than expected." It wasn't the first time work had come between them, but tonight was different. Tonight was her birthday, a day she had carefully planned to celebrate, to finally feel like they were more than just partners in a business transaction. The dinner reservation was set, the candles were lit, and the cake, his favorite, sat on the counter, untouched. She had hoped this year would be different, but as the clock ticked, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the silence settling in the house. She glanced at the clock again, 8:30 p.m. The evening was slipping away, and Richard was still nowhere to be found. Jessica put the phone down, a knot tightening in her chest. It wasn't just the missed dinner. It was the pattern. She had tried to ignore it for months. The late nights, the endless work calls, the unexplained absences. But tonight, her heart couldn't ignore the feeling that something was off. As she stood up, pacing in the quiet room, she told herself to stay calm. Maybe he really was working late. Maybe the project was more important than she realized. But something in the pit of her stomach told her that it wasn't just work keeping him away. Then, as if to confirm her darkest suspicions, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't from Richard. It was a notification from Facebook, an image posted by one of their mutual friends. The caption read, "A perfect evening with my love, Richard and Natalie." The photo was a candid shot of Richard, laughing, arm wrapped around a woman she had never seen before. Natalie. Her heart sank. The smile she had tried so hard to wear throughout the day faded. She zoomed in on the photo, analyzing every detail. The intimacy between them was undeniable. Richard's hand on her waist, the way they looked at each other. It wasn't the work he had claimed was keeping him busy. The woman in the picture, Natalie, wasn't just a casual acquaintance. The way Richard held her suggested something deeper, something more personal. The betrayal felt like a sharp sting, one she had never imagined she would feel in her own home. She wanted to scream, to throw her phone across the room, but she didn't. Instead, she sat down, her mind racing. How could he do this to her? How long had this been going on? Jessica closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. She wasn't going to let this destroy her. No, she wouldn't give him that power. She would confront him, but not in anger. Not yet. She stood up, a new resolve forming in her chest. She wouldn't be the one to fall apart. She would be the one who walked away stronger. The woman in the photo had no idea what she was about to uncover. Neither did Richard. Tonight, the truth would come out, and nothing would ever be the same. Jessica sat motionless, her phone still in her hand, the photo of Richard and Natalie staring back at her. She felt a cold rush of disbelief wash over her, the pain of betrayal settling deep into her chest. Her mind raced as she tried to process the image. Richard had always been so devoted to his work, but this was different. She had always admired his commitment, but now, with every second that passed, it felt like the foundation of their marriage was crumbling beneath her. She wanted to confront him, to demand an explanation, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that nothing he could say would make this right. She had seen the truth, plain and clear. The man she had loved and trusted for so long had betrayed her, and now, everything felt like a lie. Slowly, she set the phone down on the table and stood up. The cake she had bought for Richard lay untouched, the candles now long gone. The promise of a perfect evening shattered in an instant. She walked over to the window and stared out into the night, her mind swirling with questions. How had it come to this? How had she been so blind? The hours that followed felt like an eternity. Jessica could hardly sit still, her thoughts a whirlwind of hurt, anger, and confusion. She replayed every moment of the evening, the small signs she had ignored, the subtle shifts in Richard's behavior over the past few months. Had he been seeing Natalie all along? Was this the first time, or had it been going on for longer than she realized? She couldn't help but wonder how long it had taken for him to find the courage to lie to her so easily. She had always believed in their relationship, in the vows they had made to each other, but now she wasn't sure what was real anymore. She paced back and forth in the living room, her heart pounding. She couldn't just sit here and wait for Richard to come home, to offer some excuse or try to talk his way out of this. No, she needed answers. She deserved them. But she wouldn't do it out of rage. She refused to let this man's betrayal take away her dignity. She knew she had to stay calm, to confront him in a way that would make him understand the gravity of what he had done. The clock struck 10 p.m., and Richard still hadn't called. Jessica felt a surge of resolve. She wasn't going to let this night slip away without facing the truth. With one last deep breath, she grabbed her phone, opened a new message, and typed, "We need to talk." She hit send, knowing that this would be the last time she would ever let him manipulate her. The silence was deafening as she waited for his reply. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, but Jessica stood tall, ready for whatever came next. She wasn't going to let herself be a victim in her own life anymore. She had worked too hard to build herself into the woman she was today, and no man, no betrayal, was going to take that away from her. Richard finally called at 10:30 p.m., his voice calm, but there was a slight edge to it, as if he already knew the conversation was not going to go well. "Hey, Jess," he said, his tone sounding more distant than usual. "I'm really sorry about earlier. It's been crazy. You know how it is." Jessica's grip on the phone tightened, the sting of his words slicing through her. "No, Richard, I don't know how it is," she said, her voice steady but firm. "You said you were working, but I saw the photo. You weren't at work. You were with her." The silence on the other end was deafening. She could hear him breathing, his usual calm now replaced by an uncomfortable stillness. He wasn't sure how to respond, but Jessica didn't let him speak just yet. "I saw everything, Richard. The way you looked at her, the way she smiled at you. How long has this been going on?" Her words hit him like a slap, and the defensiveness in his voice slowly began to creep back. "Jess, I can explain," he started, but Jessica wasn't having it. "Explain what, Richard? How you've been lying to me for months. How you've been sneaking around with someone else, telling me it's just work when you're out there living a different life?" The hurt in her chest twisted, but there was no room for it now. She needed to hear the truth, no matter how much it hurt. "I thought we were past this," Richard continued, now sounding like he was trying to make himself the victim. "I didn't want to hurt you, but they just got complicated." "Complicated?" Jessica laughed bitterly. "You think this is complicated? You don't get to do this, Richard. You don't get to break my heart and then call it complicated." The words left her mouth with a force she didn't even know she had, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence between them again. "I need to see you," Richard finally said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "We can talk about this. I'll explain everything." Jessica's mind raced, but the decision felt clear. She had already seen enough. "No," she replied, her voice unwavering. "I don't need to see you. I don't need your explanations anymore." She let out a slow breath, the weight of her words settling in. "I'm done, Richard. I'm done making excuses for you. I'm done ignoring the signs." Her voice softened then, but there was no regret in it, only resolve. "I trusted you, and you betrayed that trust. That's something I can't fix." Richard didn't respond immediately, and for the first time in a long time, Jessica felt the weight of his silence. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice almost a whisper, but she could hear the desperation in it. She shook her head, even though he couldn't see it. "Sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't undo the hurt you caused. You don't get to apologize your way out of this." She paused, allowing the finality of her words to sink in. "Goodbye, Richard." And with that, she hung up. As the phone clicked, the room seemed to exhale, as if releasing the tension that had built up over the years. For the first time in a long time, Jessica felt a sense of relief, not because of the pain she had just inflicted, but because she had taken back control. She had been walking around in the shadow of his lies for so long, and now, for the first time in what felt like forever, she could finally breathe. She looked around the quiet room, the remnants of her birthday celebration still scattered across the table. The cake, the candles, the empty space where he was supposed to be, it all felt like a lifetime ago. But it didn't matter anymore. What mattered now was that she had made a choice. She had chosen herself, and that was the only thing she could control in this moment. Jessica spent the next few days in a daze, unsure of what to do next. Her decision to end things with Richard had been clear, but the aftermath felt like walking through a fog. She had spent so many years entwined with him, building a life that now seemed hollow and empty. The weeks that followed were filled with a strange mix of relief and sorrow. She moved through her daily routine like a robot, doing what needed to be done, but feeling detached from everything around her. It wasn't until she visited her best friend Rachel that the weight of it all finally hit her. Rachel had always been the one person Jessica could count on, the one who knew all the little details of her life. "How are you holding up?" Rachel asked, looking at her with concern as they sat together at a coffee shop, the warm autumn sun filtering through the windows. Jessica hesitated, then sighed. "I don't know, Rachel. I feel like I'm stuck between two worlds. There's this part of me that feels free, like I've made the right choice. But then there's this other part of me, the part that still misses him, that's afraid of being alone." Rachel nodded thoughtfully, taking a sip of her coffee. "It's normal to feel that way. You've spent a long time with him, and letting go isn't easy. But think about it. What did you gain from staying with him? The truth is, he's been lying to you. And now you're free of that lie. That's worth something, Jessica." Jessica looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I know, but it still hurts. I thought we were different. I thought we were solid. Now I just feel foolish." "You're not foolish," Rachel said gently, placing her hand on Jessica's. "You trusted him, and you loved him. There's no shame in that. The shame is on him, not you. He's the one who broke that trust. And you, Jessica, you have so much more to offer than being someone's second choice." Jessica's heart warmed at Rachel's words. It was exactly what she needed to hear, but even more, it was the truth she had been trying to deny. She had spent so many years putting Richard's needs and career before her own. She had sacrificed pieces of herself, convinced that it was all for the greater good of their life together. But now, she saw it for what it truly was, a relationship built on unequal footing, with her always giving more than she received. She had been so caught up in the fantasy of their perfect life that she had overlooked the cracks. And now those cracks were impossible to ignore. As she sat there with Rachel, Jessica felt a shift inside her. It was like a light had turned on in the darkness, illuminating everything she had been too afraid to see before. She had been living for someone else's dreams, but it was time to start living for her own. "You're right," Jessica said, the words feeling like a revelation. "I've spent so long worrying about what Richard wanted, about what everyone else expected from me. I think it's time I start focusing on what I need. I've been neglecting myself for far too long." Rachel smiled, proud of her friend. "That's the spirit. You've got this, Jessica. You're stronger than you realize." The conversation lingered in Jessica's mind long after she left the coffee shop. She had always thought that love meant sacrifice, that relationships required giving up parts of herself to make someone else happy. But now, she was beginning to see that true love, real love, started with loving herself first. And in this moment, she knew she had to take that first step, no matter how daunting it seemed. As the days passed, Jessica started to make small changes. She took up painting again, a hobby she had abandoned years ago to focus on her career and Richard. She reconnected with old friends, letting herself enjoy the company of people who had always been there for her. Slowly, she began to rebuild the parts of herself that had been neglected. And while the pain of losing Richard never fully disappeared, it became easier to bear, knowing she was no longer sacrificing her happiness for someone who didn't deserve it. It had been 2 months since Jessica ended things with Richard, and while the pain of it still lingered, she had begun to feel a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. She had made her way through the maze of emotions: anger, sadness, relief, and now she was finding herself again. There were still days when she missed the version of Richard she had loved, the man she thought she knew, but she was starting to realize that the life she had built with him wasn't hers anymore. It was a life that had been carefully constructed to fit his needs, his ambitions, and his desires. But now, it was time for her to start living on her own terms. Jessica had taken up yoga, a practice she had always been curious about, but never had time for. The comment brought to her mind was something she hadn't known she needed. It gave her space to breathe, to reflect, and to feel the kind of self-empowerment she had long been missing. She had also rediscovered her love for writing, something she had put aside when Richard's demands took over her time. Now, in the quiet of her apartment, she found herself writing about her experiences, about the emotions she had buried for so long. She even started a blog, sharing her journey with others who might be going through similar heartache. Her words resonated with readers, and the messages of support began to pour in. For the first time in a long time, Jessica felt heard. She was no longer hiding behind a facade of perfection. She was showing up as her true self, raw and unfiltered, and the world was responding in kind. One evening, after a long day of work, Jessica sat down with a cup of tea on her balcony, looking out at the city skyline. She had always loved this time of day, when the sun began to set and the world around her slowed down. It was her time to reflect and appreciate how far she had come. As she sat there, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Rachel. "Hey, you still coming tonight? It's been too long." Jessica smiled. It had been a while since she had made time for her friends. She had been so focused on her own healing that she had forgotten how important those connections were. She quickly typed back, "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Tonight, she was going to reconnect with the people who had supported her through it all. As she got ready, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. This was a new chapter for her, one where she was no longer defined by her past, but by her strength and resilience. When she arrived at the small bar where Rachel and the others were waiting, she was greeted with warm hugs and smiles. It felt good to be surrounded by people who truly cared about her, people who saw her for who she was, not the woman she had been in a relationship. They spent the evening laughing, sharing stories, and enjoying each other's company. For the first time in a long time, Jessica felt free. As the night wore on, Jessica realized something important. She had been so focused on what she had lost that she had failed to see what she had gained. She had gained independence, self-respect, and the confidence to move forward. She had started to rebuild her life, not based on someone else's expectations, but on her own dreams. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but Jessica knew now that she was ready for whatever came next. She had learned the most important lesson of all, that she was enough, just as she was. Weeks passed, and Jessica's life continued to shift in ways she never could have imagined. The healing process wasn't linear, but she had started to find new rhythms in her day-to-day routine. The pain of losing Richard had dulled, replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose. She spent more time focusing on her passions, those things she had neglected for so long. Her blog had gained traction, with people reaching out from all over, sharing their own stories of betrayal and healing. It felt like a community, a place where she could be both vulnerable and strong at the same time. One evening, as Jessica was sitting in her favorite coffee shop, typing away at her latest post, she received a text. It was from Rachel. "Hey, there's someone I want you to meet. A friend of mine from work. He's been through a lot, kind of in the same situation you were in. You two should talk." Jessica raised an eyebrow, curious but hesitant. She had spent so much time healing, so much time learning about herself, that the thought of starting something new with anyone felt like a big step. But after a moment of consideration, she decided to meet him. She owed it to herself to open up to new possibilities, even if that meant facing the unknown. The next day, they met at a local park. His name was Ben, and the moment they shook hands, Jessica noticed something different about him. There was a quiet strength in his demeanor, a sense of resilience that resonated with her. They sat down on a bench by the lake, and for the first time in a long time, Jessica allowed herself to listen without judgment. Ben shared his own story of heartbreak and betrayal. Like her, he had been blindsided by someone he trusted, and like her, he had spent months trying to piece his life back together. As he spoke, Jessica found herself nodding in understanding. She had been there. She had lived that pain. And in that moment, she realized that this connection wasn't about rushing into something new, but about shared experience and mutual support. The conversation flowed easily between them, and by the time the sun began to set, Jessica felt a sense of peace she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't looking for love. She wasn't looking for someone to fix her. What she was finding, however, was a deep sense of connection with someone who understood her in a way no one else could. As they parted ways that evening, Ben smiled at her. "I'm glad we met," he said. "Take your time. No pressure." Jessica smiled back, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't the kind of hope that depended on someone else's validation. It was the kind of hope that came from within, the hope that she was on the right path, that she was becoming the woman she had always been meant to be. The next few weeks were a slow and steady journey. Jessica didn't dive headfirst into a new relationship with Ben, but they began meeting more often, sharing meals, going for walks, and talking about their lives. There was no rush, no expectation. It felt comfortable, like she had found someone who could meet her where she was, not where she had been. As she spent time with him, Jessica realized that she wasn't afraid of the future anymore. She had spent so long fearing the unknown, but now she saw it as an opportunity, not a threat. She didn't need to have everything figured out. What mattered now was that she was moving forward, embracing the journey with open arms, and learning to trust herself once again. Jessica had been seeing Ben for a few months now, and while their connection was undeniable, she was still cautious. It wasn't that she didn't enjoy his company, or that she wasn't drawn to him. On the contrary, he was kind, thoughtful, and had a quiet strength that she admired. But Jessica had learned the hard way that rushing into anything wasn't the answer. She had spent too many years letting someone else dictate the pace of her life, of their relationship. She wasn't about to make that mistake again. Ben, for his part, never pressured her. He understood the pain she had been through, the walls she had built around herself to protect her heart. He never once tried to push her beyond what she was comfortable with, and that made all the difference. They spent their weekends doing simple things, visiting farmers' markets, hiking in the nearby hills, cooking dinner together in her cozy apartment. There was a comfort in their companionship that felt easy, natural, like two people who had known each other for much longer than they had. But even with all the warmth and connection, Jessica still held back, unsure of whether she was truly ready to give herself to someone else. She knew she was healing, but was she ready to love again? Was she ready to let go of the past? One evening, after a particularly beautiful dinner that they had cooked together, they sat on the balcony, sipping wine as the cool evening air wrapped around them. Ben, as always, was relaxed and unhurried, his easy smile never far from his lips. Jessica took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm settle over her. She had spent so much time wondering what it would be like to move on, to start fresh, and now, here she was, living it. But it didn't feel like the chaotic rush she had feared. It felt right, like the slow unraveling of something beautiful. Ben, she said, her voice soft but steady, I'm really glad we met. He turned to her, his expression gentle, not surprised but appreciative of the honesty in her words. Me too, Jessica, he replied. But you know, I've never been in a rush. I'm not here to put pressure on you. I'm just happy being with you, however that looks. There it was again, his patience, his understanding. For the first time in months, Jessica felt a weight lift from her chest. She had been so focused on moving forward that she hadn't stopped to realize that sometimes the best way to move forward was to simply let things unfold. She wasn't perfect, and she didn't have to be. She didn't need to have everything figured out right now. All she had to do was keep showing up, for herself and for the people who cared about her. Ben was one of those people, and that realization gave her a peace she hadn't known in a long time. Over the next few weeks, Jessica continued to embrace the changes in her life. She focused on her career, diving into projects she had neglected in the past. Her blog grew, and she received more messages from readers, each one reminding her that she wasn't alone in her journey. Slowly but surely, Jessica was starting to feel like herself again. And when the time came, when she felt ready to take the next step with Ben, she knew it would be on her terms. But she didn't need to rush. For the first time in years, she was living for herself, and that was enough. As the months continued to pass, Jessica's life became a balance of new beginnings and quiet reflections. She had taken on more responsibilities at work, diving into new projects with the kind of energy she hadn't known she had in years. Her blog had grown even more, and she began receiving invitations to speak at events about overcoming hardship, reclaiming one's independence, and finding strength after betrayal. It was surreal, in a way. A year ago, she had felt like she was drowning in a life that didn't fit her, and now she was standing tall, not just surviving, but thriving. Ben remained a steady presence in her life. Their relationship had blossomed naturally, like a flower opening in the sun. There was no rush, no pressure. It was just two people learning to walk alongside each other, one step at a time. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, and in return, Jessica began to realize that she had not just found someone who cared for her, but someone who truly understood her journey. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Jessica sat on her balcony, looking out over the city. She had a cup of tea in her hands, the steam rising into the cool night air. The world seemed to be moving in its own rhythm, but for once, she felt in tune with it. Life had a way of working itself out, Jessica realized. She had spent so much time trying to control every aspect of her future, fearing that if she didn't have everything planned, it would all fall apart. But now, she understood that sometimes the best way to move forward was to let go of that control, to trust in the process and believe that what was meant for her would come. She heard her phone buzz from inside the apartment. It was a text from Rachel. "How's the blog going? I saw the latest post. You're really inspiring people, Jess." Jessica smiled at the message, her heart swelling with pride. "It's going well. I've had more responses than I expected. It feels good to know that what I'm going through is helping someone else," she replied. The truth was, Jessica was no longer writing for validation. She wasn't looking for external approval or for someone to tell her she was strong. She knew it now. She was strong, not because of anyone else's words, but because she had faced the hardest moments of her life and had kept going. She had found a way to stand up for herself when it would have been easier to stay in the shadows. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Ben standing there, a soft smile on his face. "I thought I'd bring you dinner tonight," he said, holding up a bag from their favorite Italian restaurant. "It's been a long week. You deserve a break." Jessica's heart warmed. It was moments like these, the small acts of kindness, that made her feel more at peace with her decisions. She invited him inside, and as they sat down to eat, she realized that she didn't need to have everything figured out. Life wasn't about rushing to an end goal, but about enjoying the moments along the way. And for the first time in a long time, Jessica felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. It had been nearly a year since Jessica had made the decision to move on, and as she sat on her balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she felt a sense of quiet accomplishment. She had spent so much of her life trying to please others, trying to fit into a mold that had never been hers to begin with. But now, she was finally living life on her own terms, and it felt better than she ever could have imagined. Her relationship with Ben had continued to evolve naturally. They had spent the past months getting to know each other in a way that was patient and unhurried. There were no grand declarations or rushed decisions, just two people learning to trust again, to open their hearts, and to move forward in their own time. Ben had become more than just a companion. He was a partner in every sense of the word. Not someone who would complete her, but someone who complimented her in a way that made her feel seen, heard, and respected. Jessica had always believed that in order to be loved, she had to give all of herself to someone else, to sacrifice parts of who she was for the sake of the relationship. But with Ben, she realized that love didn't require sacrifice. It required mutual respect, understanding, and the freedom to grow. That realization had been liberating. As Jessica looked around her apartment, she saw the fruits of her hard work. It wasn't just about the blog or the new projects at work, although those were important. It was the little things, the plants she had started caring for, the art she had hung on the walls, the quiet moments spent in solitude or with Ben. It was the life she had built for herself, one that no longer revolved around someone else's expectations. One morning, Ben surprised her with tickets to a weekend getaway. It was a simple trip, nothing extravagant, just a cozy cabin in the mountains where they could relax and enjoy each other's company without the distractions of daily life. The thought of a weekend away filled Jessica with excitement, but also a sense of peace. This wasn't a romantic getaway designed to heal old wounds. It was just a chance to enjoy the present moment, to breathe in the fresh air, and to let go of the past. As they drove through winding roads, surrounded by trees and mountains, Jessica realized that this was the kind of life she had been craving all along. A life where she could be her true self, without the weight of past mistakes or betrayals. A life where love was something shared, not something earned or forced. By the time they reached the cabin, Jessica felt lighter than she had in years. She and Ben spent the weekend hiking, cooking together, and simply enjoying the quiet beauty of the world around them. There were no heavy conversations about the past or the future. There was just the present, and it was more than enough. On the last night of their trip, as they sat by the fire, sipping wine and listening to the crackling of the logs, Jessica felt a deep sense of gratitude. She wasn't just grateful for Ben, though she was, but for herself. She had come so far from where she had started, and she had done it on her own terms. She had found her way back to herself, and that was more than she ever could have asked for. As the fire burned low and the night grew quiet, Jessica knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead wasn't always going to be easy, but it was hers to walk, and for the first time in a long time, she felt ready for whatever came next.